Israel and Palestine, two sides that have been in conflict for the last couple of decades. And recently, the situation escalated once again. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the background of this age-old conflict, deeper insights, and what we can draw from that in order to shape our behavior, or at least our views on this whole issue. So, let's get started. The conflict between Israel and Palestine dates back even before the Second World War. It is a conflict that is drawing much attention, not only recently and periodically, but it is kind of a constant matter that is keeping international relations and discourse on international politics busy. I figured that there is kind of not in misinformation, but there's an informational gap on the specifics or the history of this age-old conflict. And I think it is very important to pick this one up in order to kind of grasp the bigger picture to all this. And the reason why I think this is a very important or interesting topic to talk about is that I actually wrote my bachelor thesis back in 2017 about the founding of Israel. So I have kind of, a little bit of a background in researching this particular issue in depth. So I think this deep dive will help you to understand the roots of this problem a little bit better and how the whole thing came about. Next to that, I'm also going to talk about the current situation, why the timing is kind of suspicious, to express myself in a very passive and favorable way. The question of how to react and how I would assess the current reactions from mainstream media, especially social media, and also finally my stance on this issue, my personal stance, or the stance that I need to adopt on this issue. So the basic narrative, starting off with the historical context, is that when we talk about the Arab-Israel conflict, that we tend to think, okay, well, the Palestinians, they were living in the lands of Palestine, obviously, and after the Ottoman Empire, collapsed and transformed into the Turkish Republic. The Jewish community moved there and settled there, and with the creation of the Jewish state, on this territory, basically, the conflict began, and Palestinians were gradually moved away or pushed away from the region that they were living in. And this is the simplistic view of it. There's lots of truth to that, and this is the development as it came about. But there is more to that actually before Israel was found. And the name of my bachelor thesis was Wide World, a Racial Perspective on the Founding of Israel. Kind of controversial title, to be honest. But I think it captures the idea quite well. Because back in the day, when the British tried to exert their influence on the Ottoman lands, when they saw that the Ottoman Empire is not going to survive the turmoil that has been going on there for basically 1 or 2 centuries at that point, they started to exert influence on those regions. With the First World War, the British and French, they were quickly to move into the Middle East and kind of find allies and install leaders there. So they naturally also moved into the territory of Israel or Palestine at that time, and they installed leaders and basically supported them, giving them military advice, but also political protection. And there was a certain correspondence that happened with the some sort of ambassador to Palestine back then. And this is the so-called Hussein McMahon correspondence. And within that correspondence, the lands of Palestine were actually granted to, or like officially granted by the British Empire to the Palestinians. But at that time, and there was the significant influence of the Jews in Great Britain, who could, basically access the British Parliament, were kind of moving in the same social surroundings. I don't know if they were golfing together or not, but the Jews in Great Britain, the more affluent, the wealthy, Jews that also were part of the Zionist movement, that basically wanted to push the agenda of moving back to Israel anyways, for many years at that time. They were able to exert their influence on the politicians in the British Empire. And because there was kind of the proximity between those two groups, the British members of parliament and the Jews that pushed for the Zionist agenda, they had like the more direct way to influence and exert or kind of push through their agenda, rather than the Palestinians who were far away. And there was just this one a diplomat who is sending letters saying, okay, well, we promised Palestine to the Palestinians. But the argument of my thesis, my paper, was basically that there was another factor that played into this whole thing. And I mean, this is something that we can all agree on from a logical or kind of the emotional, social perspective, kind of the feeling. And the argument is that because the Jews are phenotypically closer to the British, they had less of a barrier to kind of get the, how can I say it, the positive feedback from the British. So when talking about Palestinians, they are phenotypically and culturally much more different than British people, compared to what Jewish people are to British people. They look more alike, they act more like, they're more similar, and another big factor is that also the Jewish people in Great Britain at that time, they were also speaking English. There wasn't any kind of a language barrier there. So the proximity, the closeness, the similarities really aided the Zionist agenda. It helped them to, in the end, gain something that is called the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration is basically the official document stating that there is going to be an Israeli state in Palestine, and with the backing of the British. So the British revised their initial promise to the Palestinians, saying that this is going to be an Israeli territory. So from that point on, in 1948, when the State of Israel was established, one day later, I think 5 or 6 Arab nations invaded Israel and started the first Arab-Israeli war. And this is also the War of Independence from Israel, and they won. It was not a very long war, but nonetheless they won, even though Israel was just recently established, and the first 1 or 2 diasporas and they call it the aliyahs to Israel, like to return to the Holy Land, as the Torah promised them, practically, mostly from Great Britain, but more so from Eastern Europe and Germany. They moved to Israel, established the state. One day later, the Arab nations attacked Israel. They were able to defend it, obviously due to the support from the United States. as well as the European nations, the British Empire and Germany, of course, but Germany had different problems at that time, so not much support from there. But in the end, they were able to fend off the aggression from the Arabs. And this continued in 1956. There was the Suez Crisis, when Egypt regained control over the Sinai Peninsula and the Suez Canal accordingly, which was back in the at that time, a British private company. So lots of colonialism going on there as well. Then kind of the border with Egypt and Israel was established. Next, we have 67, the Six-Day War. Again, Arab nations attack Israel. Israel wins. Then we have the Yom Kippur War in 73. And there Israel wins once more again. And from that point on, obviously we then had like the Lebanon wars. But at that point, Israel was able to defend itself quite well. And because of that, it established kind of the right to be in that region. The Arab nations started to view Israel more moderately. They approached the nation more moderately. Egypt at some point recognized Israel. There have been kind of warmer relations also with Turkey and other Arab nations, because at some point you just have to acknowledge, if you attack a country over and over and again with 5-6 allies and you're not able to get a hold on this country and defeat them, well, then you just have to live with the situation, and it's better to get along with your neighbor than to keep banging at that door. In between, the Palestinians, they were kind of the victims, because due to settling policies and also attacks and military pushes, as we are seeing right now, the Palestinians are pushed back. They need to go into exile. Most of them live in Jordan, and basically the Palestinians are gradually moving away and leaving their lands, and they have to, because Israel is a much stronger opponent. So that is the whole situation, and what we need to get from this is the following. When you have such a strong opponent like Israel, and you know that Israel is backed by the whole of Europe financially and also socially and culturally, as we've seen in my bachelor thesis, but also by the United States, then you'll have to do something about it, right? I mean, there is kind of a militia, the Palestinian Liberation Army, but there are also militant terrorist organizations like the Hamas. Both of them try to hurt Israel, but this guerrilla warfare is not going to help them in the long run, because the opponent they are facing is much greater than Israel itself. And you've seen that 5 or 6 Arab nations, tried several times to defeat Israel and regain Palestine for the Palestinians, and nothing like that happened. All the diplomatic efforts that Palestine put into defending themselves were only partially successful. Right now, there's a lot of sympathy, and also in the 2021, like the last bigger clash between those two sides, the world expressed much sympathy for the Palestinians. But these efforts are just not enough. And at that point, we have to be realistic about what is going to happen to Palestine. And I think Israel is well aware about the limited capacity that the Palestinians have militarily, and the Palestinians do not have the vision to play the long game with Israel, because otherwise we would see much better institution building, much better education, much better diplomacy efforts by the Palestinians at that point. But the only thing that comes around is the hashtag Free Palestine, something that has been going on for quite some time now on social media, but also in the classic media like television or radio, something like that. So the efforts have been poor. There hasn't been any feasible vision or strategy from the Palestinians, and the Israelis know that, so they can actually lean back. And I think that these clashes or these pushes into Gaza and the West Bank are going to continue periodically, because in the long run the Palestinians will not stand their ground there. And the Palestinians basically need to reinvent their strategies, because they are trying to do the same thing over and over again, try to defend themselves, and it's not working. And there have been little efforts or little innovative efforts to kind of reverse the situation. So we have not only the military inferiority towards Israel here, but also the educational and diplomatic inferiority, that the institution building and alliance building is not strong enough for Palestine. So we also need to take into account, and this is why I brought up the historical context, is that Israel, from its founding days, was a project of Europe and more so the United States of America. And this has been affirmed over and over again. Especially the current president of this, of the United Nations of America, has repeatedly actually positioned himself behind Israel and saying, there are even old records of him saying, even if we didn't have in Israel, we would need to invent in Israel. And this makes perfect sense from the American or the Euro-American standpoint, because basically this is, Israel is the biggest military base of the Euro-Americans in the Middle East. That being so, and knowing that from this current situation, we need to be realistic about the survival chances of Palestine, and that with the current strategy, and means, Palestine sooner or later will not be a thing anymore. There will be Palestinians, of course, but Palestine itself is about to become a footnote of history, at least in the long run, and we need to be realistic about that. So that is one point, and I think going forward we will see the following development unfold, is that quite soon Israel will pull back, and diplomatic efforts from both sides will try to build up a ceasefire. There will be kind of a I won't say peaceful situation, but there will be, as I said, a ceasefire, and both sides will kind of recover. Obviously, the Palestinian side, as the main victim in this whole thing, will need to recover a bit more, and will need this period of recovery. But in 1, 2, or 3 years, the next assault will happen, and then we will have a couple of months again where Israel is going to attack Palestine. Then we'll have a ceasefire, a recovery phase. And at that point, I think where I'm getting at. In the long run, Israel will push all Palestinians away, establish the sovereign Israel as it wants to, just like they did with the Golan Heights. I mean, for those who don't know, the Golan Heights are kind of a mountainous area in the north of Israel and south of Syria. And during the Syrian civil war, and this was a demilitarized zone, that is very important to know. So United Nations soldiers were actually stationed there, and it was internationally agreed that nobody is going to touch those mountainous regions, because they're strategically very important, both for Syria and for Israel. And because there were so many clashes and border disputes, this was a demilitarized zone. And at some point, Israel just invaded the Golan Heights because there was too much turmoil in Syria, and they occupied or annexed the Golan Heights. And this is the same is going to happen with Palestine. And I think we need to be realistic about the approach that Israel is having here. Every couple of years, they will try to exile more and more Palestinians. But in this particular situation, I think one very interesting thing is the timing of the assault or the conflict that has erupted here. And that is, if you think back to January of this year, what happened there? If you think back to January this year and look across the Middle East and focus on Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Israel, in short, you will see something that you've rarely seen in the whole history of the Jews, actually. And that being protests, widespread protests across Tel Aviv. And they were kind of, I wouldn't say aggressive, but very offensive. They were very assertive in what they tried to achieve. There were some reform packages pushed or proposed by the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and he actually wanted to gain more power in parliament and establish a more right-wing constellation there in order to push for other reforms as well. And the country was kind of upset with that. They didn't want this autocratic type of leadership, so they went to the streets protesting against Netanyahu. And this happens so rarely in Jewish history that it's striking that a couple of months later, a big war is, or the biggest conflict between Israel and the Palestinians for, I think, the last 10 or 20 years erupts just like a couple of months after that. And if we look at the demographics of those protests, we will see that a lot of young people protested for a more liberal direction of Israel, which is opposed to the right-wing approach of Netanyahu. And because of that, and what those people were protesting for, even with rainbow flags and the wish to have like a more democratic, a more inclusive, in general, just a more liberal Israel, that was clashing with the political direction, young people, and just a very strange situation that you did not hear a lot of from in the media. So then, a couple of months later, right, 7-8 months later, or 9 months later, a festival in Israel with young people who you would assume generally have a more liberal orientation or worldview, and especially at a festival, if you're going to a rave festival, you are very unlikely to be right-wing and racist and nationalist and whatnot, right? You're just, you have the tendency to be more liberal if you are visiting a techno festival at a young age. This is just the demographics of how things work. And suddenly, the Hamas is killing over 200 people there, capturing some of those young people. And it's very interesting because you might assume that if you're one of the protesters who went on the streets back in January and now see that your potential friends or maybe even your friends, were slaughtered by the opposing force that you were actually defending back in January because you said we need a peaceful coexistence, it might trigger the hidden or underlying nationalist ideas even of those people. I'm talking very hypothetically, but what I'm saying is not very hypothetical. In short, the timing is a bit too favorable for Israel or for Netanyahu, especially, to be a coincidence. I'm not saying that Hamas is controlled by Israel, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case, first of all. I'm not saying that this conflict erupted because of the protest back in January, and this is a whole distraction movement or kind of a strategy to bring the dispersed or fragmented Israeli society back together. I'm not saying that it is that way, but the probability is relatively high because the timing is just picture perfect in that situation. It brings a lot of advantages for Israel. And while they're being at it, they're pushing a lot of Palestinians away. So they make significant territorial advances at that point. So I think the recent historical context here is also very very interesting. Whether it's coincidence or not, I leave it up to you. Obviously, in those situations, we do not have evidence. How could you? I mean, if that is the truth, then the Mossad and obviously the minister, the office of the prime minister, is doing everything they can, or are doing everything they can to hide all the evidence. But I'm just saying the timing is a bit suspicious, as I said in the beginning. The next point is the question of how to react to all that. And here we have, again, another very interesting situation. No other conflict in the world, and maybe in history, was pushed from such an emotional standpoint as the Israel-Palestine conflict. And that's really true. I mean, wherever you look, all the footage show children and hospitals bombed, children crying, mothers with their bleeding children in their arms, and also the people fleeing from their homes. Is very dramatic. There's a whole dramatic build-up wherever you look, and this is all across media, what you can see there. And that is also a bit suspicious because in other conflicts, we do not have that type of explicit video material. And I think this is also quite disturbing. I mean, there are pictures and videos that shouldn't be allowed to be shown in public because they're very disturbing and can cause also psychological damage, especially if you're younger. But in this conflict, they're showing almost everything, and it's very disturbing and very emotionally built. And then you look into the reactions, as I said earlier, with the hashtag Free Palestine and whatnot. I think this is also kind of an induced situation, because what I found, and this is something that becomes clearer to me by the day, is the more emotionally you approach something, the more it blends you, and the more it kind of, the more it distracts you from what is actually a good approach or good analytical and technical approach to things. It prevents you from seeing clearly what is going on there. And it also creates the false perception of being part of the problem. What do I mean by that? If you're overly emotional and the pictures and videos, the footage is basically triggering strong emotions within you, you're more invested into this whole thing. You want to voice your opinion. You want to put that Free Palestine hashtag under every post. And once you do that and share this whole thing in your Instagram story, post it on Twitter, on Facebook, and everywhere else, you feel like you participated in this conflict and did what you could to prevent it. And it stays there. People are not even protesting anymore at that frequency as it was the case back in the 70s, for example, in the Vietnam War. People are just on social media tweeting about how bad the situation in Palestine is. Speakers or heads of states, they go into the public and saying, they're condemning Israel for their atrocious acts. And that's that. And this seems to be sufficient. In the end, nothing really happens other than all people being invested and having washed off their guilt by posting Free Palestine everywhere. And then, obviously, when I talk to people, the first question that comes up, but what can I do? I'm here out of nowhere, sitting thousands of kilometers away. What can I do? And the answer is simple. If you want to participate in this whole thing, you have two options. Either you go there and fight, or you boycott the products of those who are financing the war. Because in the end, we are living in a capitalist, financialized and globalized world, and everything, or the thing that hurts very capitalized or financialized economies the most is money. So if you're so invested in resolving the conflict, then just boycott American products because they're the one financing this whole operation. I mean, obviously, you can also boycott Israeli products, that's for sure. But what is the export volume of Israel? I mean, it's not that much. It's almost zero, But the Americans, if they're financing, they're supporting, they're diplomatically doing everything they can to support Israel. If the whole world or all people who are sympathizing with Palestinians just boycott the American products, then I think quickly we'll come to a viable solution, because at least something is going to move and change, at least in the short run. This is the way it is, but nobody wants to give up on drinking Pepsi and Coke. Nobody wants to stop buying Nikes and iPhones. Nobody wants to stop using social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. And because of that, the conflict will continue. And because nobody is doing something against it, neither the Palestinians are basically building up a good strategy against Israel, nor are the sympathizers of Palestine and Palestinians are doing something workable and feasible in that regard. I think in the long run, we will not have Palestine anymore. We will not talk about it in 100 years, I'm pretty sure. And that is because the responses have been so ridiculous, actually, and not really goal oriented in that sense, right? So just to sum up, we have a very complex history of Israel being able to defend the claimed land of Palestine as Israel, and they have a right to do so because they were able to defend those territories. So they gained every right to call that Israel and to establish the state there because they were able to defend it. Obviously, with the help of the Americans, but this is what reality shows us, right? If the Arab nations would have done a better job, they could have gotten back the lands for the Palestinians. That is not the case. And with each and every year that passes, they are consolidating and solidifying their position. What we've also seen is that the Palestinian response did not change over the last 50 years. While Israel was able to develop better strategies, not better in the sense that they're morally better, but in the sense that they are tactically better for their purpose, without judging their purpose or the actions that they are doing there, right? But they were able to innovate and develop and kind of always go into the direction they want their country to go. And the Palestinians stuck to the guerrilla warfare that they did 40, 50 years ago. Nothing changed. Education's level low, diplomatic alliance building and legitimacy building was low. Economic development was low. And because of that, the signs show that Palestine is not going to survive for a long time. So I'm just saying, in 100 years of time, we will not see them or talk about this region as such. On the other hand, again, summarizing, the timing of Israel very suspicious. This current war and conflict was so advantageous to them that it raises the questions whether Hamas is controlled by Israel. It raises the questions whether this was an instigated situation to distract from the protests that Israel has gone through earlier, as well as heightening or increasing the feeling of or the national pride in that sense. Then the social media reactions and how people internationally react to this whole thing were ridiculous, and the emotions kind of distract people from clearly thinking about the solution and going about it, and basically doing the only thing they could, and that is to boycott Israeli and American products. So finally, what is my stance on this? So it might sound that there is, when we talk about the boycott and the suspicious timing of Israel and whatnot, it might read or kind of sound like I'm advocating for any of the actions to taken against Israel, but that is really not the case. My stance is pretty much informed from my nationality as a Turk. And when I'm thinking back about the last couple of years, let's say the last 2 decades, maybe, and I'm looking at what Israel has, or the Israel-Turkey relationship, right? I have to say that Israel never, I would not say never ever, but in recent years, in recent decades, Israel never stood up against Turkey, right? When Turkey went into Syria to end the civil war there and were successful after the third try, all 3 tries, Israel didn't say anything. When Turks, including Azeri Turks, defended their territorial claims against Armenia, Israel didn't say a thing. In the Cyprus situation, Israel has been quiet. I don't know, and don't get me wrong, I don't know the exact statement or stance of Israel towards the Cyprus issue, but from what I know and what I researched, Israel has been also quiet about this issue, even if they recognize Cyprus as something different than Turkish. They were not so loud about it like other countries, for example. So whenever we had international problems, and Turkey is at the crossroads of many conflicts, Israel was quiet. They didn't stood up for us, but they also didn't stood up against us, and that's perfectly fine, right? So there's one argument or one reason why I, as a Turk, cannot stand against Israel. That wouldn't be right. I mean, they didn't say anything against us. Why should I say anything against them? You might then say, well, what they are doing is so atrocious that internationally there's the moral obligation to stand up for Palestine. And I understand that argument. And I would agree with you if it wasn't for a very, very interesting situation between Palestine and Turkey. That is, whenever, and I enlisted all the occasions of when Israel didn't turn against Turkey, Palestine on those issues turned against us. They didn't recognize Cyprus as Turkish. They stood for the Armenians when Turks defended their territorial claims there. They condemned us when we went into Syria to end the civil war there. Even the Palestinian flag, if you are familiar with the flag, there's this red triangle on the left-hand side of the flag. It symbolizes, and they did this together with the British back then, the red in the Palestinian flag symbolizes or represents the fight against the Ottoman Turks back in the day. A time when we delivered them over 400, 500 years of peace and security. They didn't have any problems. 10 years after we left, or 20 years after we left, because the Ottoman Empire collapsed, they lost their lands. 500 years, no problem at all. And then they stood up against us. They were fighting against the Ottomans in order to accelerate the collapse. And 20 years later, they lost their lands practically. But still on their flag, they have this red in order to say, yeah, we stood up against you. You are the bad Turks. And if even this is not where it ends, the worst thing above all is that the representative of the Palestinians went to the Chinese and openly supported the Chinese, the genocide on the Uyghur Turks in China, in East Turkestan. There's, as you know, there's this ongoing genocide in East Turkestan, an occupied province by China, right? And the people there are slaughtered, re-educated, they're in concentration camps, and the Palestinian representative, Abbas, goes to the Chinese in order to, obviously, to secure diplomatic and economic support, supports the Chinese against Uyghur Turks. And obviously, Uyghur Turks and Turks, we are basically the same. They're just living in a different part of the world. But they went on to support the genocide on the Uyghur Turks. And now people expect from Turkey to also stand up against Israel because they are also Muslims. And I'm not supporting that. I'm definitely not supporting that. You will not hear from me that I stand for Palestine, and I will not stand for Palestine unless they revoke all of the said things and explicitly stand on the side of the Turks. Why should I stand up against Israel, which never in the last years stood up against me and said something negative about me, or like in a representative manner for Turkey? They didn't say anything about Turkey, but all of a sudden I have to stand for Palestine, a nation that is always pushing against Turks. And this is not fair. This is not fair against Israelis, and this is not fair against my own people. So I will not say that. I'm not saying that Israel is doing the right thing. Definitely not, of course. What they're doing is atrocious and morally incorrect, same as the terrorist attacks by Hamas. But obviously Israel is far more aggressive against Palestinians. And I'm also deeply moved and deeply saddened by the situation there, especially for all the children and animals and all who cannot really defend themselves, right? That is not the case from a moral standpoint and from ethic standpoint. Obviously, I want this whole thing to end, and it saddens me to see all these things. But I will not openly express my sympathy for Palestine because that is not my conflict. And two sides are clashing, whereas one side, the victim named Palestine, was always against me, and the, let's say, aggressor or the stronger side, Israel, was always neutral towards me. And this is what I can only say to all Turks. This is obviously up to you, but if you really are a Turk and stand for our values and for our people, you should not be standing for Palestine. You should remain neutral in the situation, right? And the arguments for that are quite clear. So this might have been kind of a surprising ending to what has been a deep dive into, and this is actually not a deep dive. If we really want to dive deep into this matter, I mean, we would have to talk about for days about it. In the end, it's a very far-reaching conflict. I wouldn't say complex because it's quite straightforward, to be honest. But what we can take away from this is that we only have limited possibilities to influence this conflict, namely boycotting it if you're pro-Palestine. If you're pro-Israel, then you don't need to do anything, because in the end, as I said, 100 years of time, they will occupy the whole lands, if not much earlier. It will go on like that, and I think the next couple of clashes and conflicts will be, also timed in a manner that suits Israeli domestic politics quite well, as it did this time. So nothing will change really, because those who want change, meaning the sympathizers of Palestine, they're not changing themselves, right? Israel has changed. Israel has adopted their strategies and everything. We're innovators in that sense. The Palestinians weren't. So if we really want to have change, then it's best to start with oneself. And I just mention a couple of possibilities here. If you liked this podcast episode, I would be glad if you share it, comment it. You can also text me and start a discussion. I'm very curious about what you have to say. But first and foremost, subscribe. That would be great. I will pick this one up a bit more frequently and inform you with deep diving analysis on different topics in the future. So thank you very much for listening. I enjoyed it a lot, and I hope to have you back next time for another episode, or another podcast episode, better said, of Aceto Magazine. So until then, take care, have a good one, and bye.